There's a specific detail in Thomas Markle's ongoing story that I think genuinely deserves more careful attention than it usually receives, because it's easy to skip right past it in the general noise and volume of everything else this family generates on a weekly basis.
Right now, Thomas Markle Jr. has lashed out at his sister in the most brutal interview he has ever given.
A year ago, in a hospital on the other side of the world, he reportedly lost part of a leg. No visit from his daughter, no phone call by his own account. A letter arrived, reportedly days later, after a reporter was already stationed outside the hospital. I want to walk through this entire story properly and carefully because I genuinely think it says something worth examining closely about the gap that can exist between a carefully constructed public persona built around compassion and a private family relationship that's remained fractured for the better part of a decade now, largely out of public view until moments like this one force it back into the conversation.
Royal family, you should be so thankful this woman wanted to leave because she's not going to bring any good to the branding of royalty. She's going to downgrade it to a level of ghetto. And that's what it is. This is just bad.
Let's start with who Thomas Markle actually is, because I think the fairy tale version of Meghan's origin story tends to erase him almost entirely. He's a two-time Emmy-winning lighting director who spent his career working in American television. By multiple accounts, he paid for Meghan's private schooling, her acting classes, the countless auditions that eventually led her out of relative obscurity and into Hollywood. He was, by his own telling and by hers in earlier interviews, present for the beginning of her career in ways that mattered.
Now, after this point, when you've had 7 years knowing my father's phone number, it hasn't changed for 15 years. It's the same phone number. You have not reached out. You have not texted. You have not called.
The relationship reportedly began fracturing publicly right around the royal wedding. Days before the ceremony, Thomas Markle had a heart attack, was hospitalized, and was too unwell to travel or to walk his daughter down the aisle as originally planned. The wedding went ahead as scheduled, with Charles stepping in to walk her down the aisle instead. According to Thomas Markle's own account, the last real conversation between them happened over that hospital phone call, and it reportedly ended badly. What followed was 7 years of near-total silence, broken only sporadically.
Someday Meghan's going to realize that she's obviously missing out on a really good, tight-knit family. I mean, we're all still together all the time, no matter what, and you can't put a price on it.
Harry reportedly sent messages during that period urging Thomas to pick up the phone, framed with real urgency, asking simply for a conversation. According to available reporting, none of that changed the underlying dynamic. Whatever combination of hurt, stubbornness, and circumstance kept the silence going, it held. The wedding itself deserves a moment of closer examination too, because I think the way it's often retold flattens something genuinely complicated into a simpler story than what likely actually happened.
In my opinion, she would still be a waitress if it wasn't for Dad.
A father having a heart attack days before his daughter's wedding is a genuine medical emergency, not a convenient excuse or a scheduling inconvenience. The decision to proceed with the wedding as planned, with an alternative arrangement for walking down the aisle, is not inherently callous. Royal weddings involve enormous logistical machinery that isn't easily rescheduled. Guest lists spanning heads of state, security arrangements planned months in advance. There's a reasonable version of events where postponing simply wasn't a realistic option, regardless of anyone's personal wishes in the moment.
People of this evil bullshit caliber do not have a place on this world.
What makes the situation harder to read charitably, according to critics, isn't necessarily the decision to proceed with the wedding itself. It's what reportedly happened afterward, the specific quality and duration of the silence that followed, stretching from a difficult moment into what became years of near total distance, through subsequent serious health events rather than easing over time as emotions cooled and perspective returned.
I made one dumb mistake, and I'm never being forgiven for it. And this show that they're on, they talk about compassion. There's no compassion for me. There's no compassion for my family. And there's no compassion for the royal.
Here's where I think it's important to be fair and specific rather than simply piling on, because the situation is genuinely more complicated than a single villain narrative allows for. Thomas Markle has, at various points, given interviews, posed for staged paparazzi photographs before the wedding, and spoken to tabloids in ways that reasonable people can see as a father processing pain publicly. or as a father contributing to his own estrangement, or both simultaneously. Meghan's team has previously suggested the relationship broke down partly because of those media interactions. That's a real legitimate part of this story too, and I don't think it's honest to leave it out just because it complicates the narrative.
If you think about it, Meghan got everything she wanted. She got the husband, she got the children, she got the HRA, she got everything that allowed her to rise up and have that global recognition that we know how badly she wanted that.
It's also worth acknowledging directly that public estrangements like this one rarely have a single triggering moment, however much any retelling wants to identify one specific villain scene. More often, they're the product of years of accumulated smaller hurts, miscommunications, and incompatible expectations that eventually calcify into permanent distance once enough time passes, without anyone taking the harder step of reaching out first. The wedding may be the most visible flashpoint in this particular story, but it's entirely possible, even likely, that the actual roots of the estrangement run considerably deeper and considerably further back than that single week. But here's what doesn't really get disputed by either side, regardless of how you interpret everything that led up to it. Thomas Markle is now in his 80s, has reportedly survived multiple heart attacks and a stroke that affected his speech, and has said publicly and repeatedly that he has never met his own grandchildren. He's also said consistently that he doesn't want money, that he lives simply and isn't seeking financial support from a daughter who could, by any reasonable measure, easily afford to provide it.
It's no mystery that Meghan pays people to go after anybody who says anything bad about her. One day, all the Sussex squad will be wiped off the face of the fucking planet, period, along with Meghan.
What he says he wants is considerably smaller than that. A phone call and the chance to meet his grandchildren before time runs out on that possibility. If this breakdown is giving you more context than the usual headline version, the like button helps this channel keep doing exactly that kind of work.
Stop sending your government officials in to the hospital in the Philippines. Pick up your goddamn mobile phone. Call Caroline Graham. You know her number. Pass the mobile phone over to Thomas Markle. Have a conversation. Anything less than that proves that you're not a human being, which is something that we've known for a long time.
There's something genuinely worth sitting with in the specific detail about money, or rather the reported absence of any request for it. In a lot of public family estrangements involving wealthy or famous individuals, financial motive is often assumed as the underlying explanation for why an estranged relative speaks publicly at all. The assumption being that going to the press is fundamentally a negotiating tactic aimed at eventually extracting some kind of payout or reconciliation on favorable terms. Thomas Markle's consistent public position across years of interviews and statements has specifically and repeatedly excluded that motive. He's stated plainly that he doesn't want money, doesn't need it, and has never asked his daughter for financial support despite her considerable wealth.
I wish we could sit down and talk. I wish we could work out differences. Meghan, she loved me. I'm a hero. And suddenly I was thrown out.
Whether or not you believe every specific claim he's made about the broader relationship, that particular claim is fairly easy to verify by its absence. There's no reported lawsuit, no public demand for financial settlement, nothing resembling the kind of transactional angle that typically accompanies estrangements driven primarily by money. Now here's where the story becomes a pattern rather than a single isolated situation, and I think this is genuinely the more interesting and more revealing part of it. It's not only Thomas Markle who's experienced this kind of distance. Charles, Harry's own father, opened the doors of the institution to Meghan, granted her a title, and stepped in personally to walk her down the aisle when her own father couldn't. When Charles was later diagnosed with cancer and began treatment, Harry made a brief visit during a UK trip before returning to the US relatively quickly. Meghan reportedly did not travel for that specific visit at all.
And I certainly spent a lot of my life with her. I don't know how she can throw all it away.
It's worth being genuinely fair to Harry specifically in this comparison because his situation with his own father is considerably more nuanced than a simple parallel to the Thomas Markle estrangement suggests. Harry has, by multiple recent accounts, actually made real efforts toward reconciliation with Charles. Brief visits, reported meetings, at least some attempt to maintain a connection despite years of public conflict and institutional distance between them. That's a meaningfully different posture than total sustained silence. The criticism in this specific comparison isn't that Harry has done nothing at all toward his father. It's more specifically about Meghan's apparent absence from those particular visits and moments, and what that absence might suggest about her own priorities when it comes to showing up for family members going through serious health difficulties, regardless of which side of the family they're on.
But I have to just say, anyone who has doubted me over the past decade about this evil woman now needs to eat some humble pie.
Line those two situations up next to each other, and you get an uncomfortable symmetry worth naming directly. Two older men, both of whom extended significant support to this couple at pivotal moments, both facing serious health situations, and in neither case did sustained in-person support flow back in return. Critics have pointed to that pattern specifically, arguing that someone whose public brand centers so heavily on compassion and connection might reasonably be expected to show up differently for the people closest to her, particularly during the most difficult moments of their lives.
During the Oprah interview, when Meghan said she had no siblings, when she told the world she was an only child, I mean, were you disappointed?
No, I just made a little mark on my board and said, oh, there's another lie, click.
If this breakdown is giving you a fuller and more balanced picture than the usual polarized version of this story, the like button genuinely helps this channel reach more people looking for exactly that kind of nuance rather than a simple villain narrative in either direction. Now let's talk about the privacy question specifically, because I think this is genuinely where the contradiction critics point to becomes hardest to fully explain away, even accounting for legitimate complexity elsewhere in the story. When Thomas Markle spoke publicly about a private letter Meghan had sent him, Harry and Meghan responded by describing it as a profound invasion of privacy, ultimately pursuing legal action against a newspaper that published portions of it.
August 4th, 40 years ago, Meghan was born, and she was born as a C-section, so she was put in my arm. I was the first person to hold her. Her little hand went on my fingers like that, and I fell in love with her, and I had been that way for 40 years.
Privacy, in their framing at the time, was described as sacred, the one thing worth fighting for above almost everything else. There's a detail worth including here for full context. Reporting has suggested that Meghan's own representatives were the ones who first shared information about that letter with a magazine through mutual friends, before Thomas Markle responded publicly himself. If that account is accurate, it complicates the simple victim narrative considerably, suggesting the story became public because both sides, at different points, chose to engage with the press about it rather than staying silent. What critics find harder to reconcile is what happened next. This is a couple that fought a very public legal battle over press intrusion and who have also, in the years since, signed a significant deal with Netflix, published a best-selling memoir containing extensive private family detail, and featured their own children in produced lifestyle content designed for public consumption. The tension there is real and worth naming plainly. Privacy, as an absolute principle, doesn't fully square with a business model that depends substantially on sharing curated private moments for profit. That doesn't necessarily make either position dishonest on its own.
It's really a little bit disturbing. Saying that, she doesn't have a family, she doesn't have a father, it's just ridiculous.
Public figures navigate this tension constantly, and reasonable people build businesses around selective disclosure all the time. But it does complicate the framing of privacy as something sacred and non-negotiable, when it's also functioning as a carefully managed commercial asset. It's genuinely worth pausing here to note that this specific tension, privacy as principle versus privacy as commodity, isn't unique to this couple, and singling them out as uniquely hypocritical on this specific point risks missing a broader pattern that applies to a huge number of public figures who build careers partly on personal disclosure. Memoirs, docuseries, and curated social content are standard tools across celebrity culture generally, used by people who simultaneously and genuinely value certain boundaries around their private lives. The tension is real, but it's not evidence of unique bad faith specific to Harry and Meghan. What does distinguish their specific situation is the scale and intensity of the legal action taken over press coverage of private matters, set directly against the scale and intensity of their own subsequent disclosures. A contrast that's considerably sharper than what most public figures navigating similar tensions actually produce. There's also the only child comment, which generated its own significant and lasting backlash at the time it was made. During a televised interview, Meghan described her upbringing in a way that a lot of people read as effectively erasing the existence of her father, her half-sister, and her half-brother, all of whom are undeniably real people who share her history, whether or not the current relationship with them is close. Whatever the actual state of those relationships, describing herself as having grown up essentially as an only child struck a lot of viewers, including people with no particular stake in defending Thomas Markle specifically, as a genuinely strange thing to say about a family that unquestionably exists and unquestionably shaped her early life in some form. It's worth adding some nuance here too, because only child-style comments are actually fairly common among people who've experienced genuine estrangement, and don't automatically indicate an attempt to erase family members who still exist. People who've been raised primarily by one parent, or who've had minimal contact with siblings for most of their adult lives, sometimes genuinely experience their upbringing that way emotionally, even when it's not technically accurate in a strict biological sense. Whether that's what was happening here, or whether it was a more calculated piece of narrative shaping designed to simplify a complicated backstory into something more sympathetic, is genuinely hard to determine with certainty from the outside looking in. Her half-sister Samantha has been particularly vocal and consistent in her public criticism over the years, arguing publicly that without their father's financial and personal investment in Meghan's early career, none of what followed, the acting career, the marriage, the platform, would have been possible in the first place. Her half-brother Thomas Jr. has made similar points, along with sharper personal criticism of how Meghan has reportedly handled relationships more broadly. It's worth being honest that both of them have their own complicated histories and their own reasons, personal and possibly financial, for speaking publicly the way they have. Family estrangements are rarely simple, and people on every side of them tend to have their own version of events, shaped by their own hurt and their own incentives. But when three separate people who knew Meghan well before any of this became a global story, her father, her half-sister, her half-brother, are independently describing a similar pattern of distance and prioritization, it's genuinely difficult to dismiss all three accounts as simple bitterness or attention-seeking, even accounting for whatever bias any individual account might carry. It's genuinely worth flagging one more time clearly that Samantha and Thomas Jr. both have their own complicated personal histories and their own possible incentives, financial, reputational, or simply emotional, for speaking as publicly and as often as they have about their half-sister's choices. That doesn't automatically make their accounts inaccurate, but it's a relevant piece of context that deserves to sit alongside their criticism rather than being ignored in favor of treating every statement from either of them as simple, disinterested truth-telling. Let's talk about the letter specifically now, because I think the actual timing of it matters considerably more to this story than the content of the letter itself ever really did. According to Thomas Markle's account, he was in the hospital in a genuinely serious medical situation, and what he received from his daughter was a note rather than a visit, a call, or any form of direct real-time contact. It reportedly arrived several days after the hospitalization began, and only after media attention around the situation had already started building. Whether that sequencing reflects careful, considered timing, or simply the practical difficulty of reaching someone quickly during a health crisis is genuinely something only the people directly involved actually know for certain. But the optics of it, a note arriving once press attention had already gathered outside a hospital, are the kind of detail that's fed a considerable amount of public skepticism about how genuine the response actually was. Here's the picture a lot of critics have pointed to as capturing the contrast most sharply. During the same general period Thomas Markle was hospitalized, Meghan was reportedly filming lifestyle content centered on warmth, comfort, and domestic joy. Two very different realities existing simultaneously, one heavily documented and publicly celebrated, the other largely unaddressed until it became difficult to ignore. None of this exists in isolation from the broader question of character that a lot of commentary keeps circling back to. Thomas Markle has been blunt in his own public assessments, describing Harry in one widely circulated comment in fairly harsh terms, and describing his own daughter as someone who tends to take charge of every situation she enters. Samantha and Thomas Jr. have offered similarly pointed critiques, particularly around the specific length and totality of the silence. Thomas Jr. has specifically noted the absence of even a text message across years that included multiple serious health emergencies. I want to be fair here and acknowledge the other side of this directly, because I think it deserves real space rather than a token mention. Meghan has never publicly detailed her own account of why the relationship deteriorated to this degree, and it's entirely possible there are specific incidents, specific betrayals of trust, or specific patterns of behavior from her father's side that would meaningfully change how this reads if we had her full account rather than largely hearing from the other side of the estrangement. Public figures are not obligated to air every detail of a painful family situation, and choosing privacy around genuinely difficult family history is not inherently suspicious on its own. People estrange from family members for real, valid reasons all the time, and the person choosing distance doesn't always owe the public a detailed justification for that choice. What makes this particular situation harder to fully resolve either way is the specific combination of factors. The consistency of the accounts from multiple family members over an extended period. The fact that Thomas Markle has reportedly never requested money and has said so repeatedly. And the visible contrast between a public brand built substantially around themes of compassion, healing, and connection, and a private family relationship that's remained unresolved through multiple serious health crises. There's a broader lesson in this entire situation that I think extends well beyond just one family, however famous. Estrangement, especially prolonged estrangement involving elderly parents and serious health crises, rarely resolves cleanly from the outside through public commentary or online pressure. The people who actually need to make the decision to reach out or to finally answer are the only ones who genuinely hold that choice. And public opinion, however loud or however unanimous it becomes, has historically had very little actual power to force a private reconciliation that both parties aren't already independently ready for. Where this actually leaves things right now is genuinely uncertain, and I don't think there's a clean, satisfying resolution available from the outside looking in, however much we might want one. Thomas Markle, by his own most recent public statements, has said clearly and repeatedly that he would still take a call from his daughter if one ever came, regardless of everything that's happened between them across these past several difficult years. Whether that call happens, and what it would actually require from either side to make it happen, remains something only the people directly involved can answer. What do you genuinely think? Does the privacy versus publicity contradiction we walked through change how you personally read the broader Sussex brand and its central themes of compassion and connection? Or do you think estrangements as long and as complicated as this one are simply too difficult to fairly judge from the outside without hearing every side of it directly? And separately, do you think there's still a genuinely realistic path to some kind of reconciliation here, given everything that's accumulated over these past several years? Or has too much time and too much public conflict already passed for that to remain a realistic possibility at this point in both of their lives? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments, subscribe to Palace Insider if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.